We're on. Super. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to all the people who have signed up and took a little extra time with us as we figured out some kind of tech issues. We're thrilled to have Heather Cox Richardson with us here today in conversation, and we're pleased that all of you have joined us. There are over 500 people who have registered for this phone call covering all the regions of Georgia and parts of the United States. We are Barb and Rick Burt of Indivisible Georgia Congressional District 10. And we note there are many other Georgia indivisible groups with us today. Indivisible Georgia 10 was started in 2017. Today has over 2,300 members strong. We're focused in Congressional District 10, which incorporates 18 counties and part of 2 others, and has over 800,000 Georgia residents. Indivisible is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to defending democracy and promoting progressive values through grassroots activism and civic engagement. I know a lot of you know this, but there are a few people who are new to this game, so we thought we'd give a little bit of background. We are at CD10 are one of over 40 indivisibles in Georgia. There are over 2,200 in the United States, and apparently we are growing every day. In a minute, Barb will introduce our distinguished guest, but I need to cover a little bit of groundwork and some background before that can happen. Today, we're having a conversation with Heather, and I know a lot of you have helped us with that by submitting interesting questions. To help make it so, last week you submitted all these, and Barb and I have spent some time consolidating questions. We have probably more than Heather's prepared to answer, although she's agreed to stay till midnight, I think, wasn't it, Heather?
Exactly. And you guys agreed that you would write tonight's letter for me. So we're absolutely square.
I've already started that. So we've reviewed the questions. We've had to consolidate a lot. If you don't see the exact question you submitted, we certainly hope you see the topic that Heather will be covering. Just a quick note, this conversation is going to be recorded. And also, we're turning off the chat right now because we thank you for all your questions, but we're not able to take any more right now. And we'd really like to focus on what Heather has to say. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Barb, and she'll tell you a little bit more about Heather.
Okay, Heather, your ears are going to burn here. We're all here because we know something about Heather Cox Richardson, primarily from her Facebook and Substack accounts, both of which have millions of subscribers, called Letters from an American. So we know she's a historian who helps us place today's news in the context of American history. And we appreciate her because she's a professor who's honed the ability to help readers wade through details to find the crucial nuggets of information. And with her daily letters, she is deliberately creating an historical record. Heather did not start off being a thorn in the side of a Republican-aligned authoritarian regime, but she's long studied the trajectory of the GOP since its inception in 1854. I didn't mean that she studied since 1854, but that the Republicans have been around since 1854. Her books help us trace her vision of this transformation, and some of them are titled things like The Greatest Nation of the Earth, The Death of Reconstruction West from Appomattox, The Reconstruction of America After the Civil War, Wounded Knee, Party Politics and the Road to an American Massacre, To Make Men Free, A History of the Republican Party, and How the South Won the Civil War, Oligarchy, Democracy, and the Continuing Fight for the Soul of America. Here are a few things you might not know about Heather. She's an avid sea kayaker. She appeared on stage at the Tanglewood Music Festival with Yo-Yo Ma, and she can occasionally be found wrangling lobsters at a local dockside eatery. And with all the demands on her time, she's a generous friend, giving up her Sunday afternoon to talk with us here in Georgia, for which we are most grateful. So let's see, are you ready? Shall we start with some questions?
Yeah, sure. And thank you very much for that introduction. It's actually cold and rainy here, and I did, in fact, just get off the water.
All right. All right.
True Mainer.
Flat calm out there, but we have sturgeons now. I don't know if you saw them when you were here.
Wow.
And they're really impressive, and they're really stupid. They're not afraid at all of kayaks.
Do they leap out of the water?
They leap entirely out of the water, so their tails clear
Oh,
the
I
water,
saw
they go
one.
up and then they slam down, and they can be, I've read up to 300 pounds. Ours, I haven't seen anyone bigger than 5 feet long, but that's plenty big when it comes up next to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, stay
Wow.
safe, Heather Cox Richardson.
Well,
We need you.
if I go down, you can blame the sturgeons.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, right.
Okay, we're going to start with a sort of a general background question. We all read your letters from an American every morning. They constitute the start of the day for many of us. Stepping back a bit, can you give us some background as to why you first started writing the letters in 2019 and what you had hoped to accomplish then? And are your goals different today?
Well, that's a great question. So I did not ever intend to start writing these letters. They were simply, they came from my readers, basically, as a way to put it. I had been writing on Facebook about once a week since about 2014. Maybe later than that. Just an essay about something I cared about. It wasn't necessarily history, it was literature or life or whatever. And I hadn't written in 2019 since July 18th because I was moving and, my life was pretty busy. And, when you move, you got to do stuff and it's hard. And so I hadn't written. And actually, the house I was moving out of needed paint around the windows. So I was painting the windows in September, on September 15th, 2019. And uh, I will tell you the full story since you know the people involved. I won't go on a ladder unless there's somebody there. So I asked my brother-in-law to come watch, and he couldn't do the work himself or help me with the work because he has health issues. But so we were chatting, and I was mostly moved out of the house, but I needed to paint the windows for the people coming in, the areas around the windows. So I was painting them, and I got stung by a yellow jacket, and I am allergic to yellow jackets. And you know how aggressive they are in September. So I got stung and I turned to him and I said, Chris, I've been stung by a yellow jacket. And as I said, I'm allergic. And he goes, oh my God, I'll get your EpiPen. And he started to run toward the house that I had moved out of. And I said, oh, Chris, you're not going to want to hear this. And he said, oh, it's already at the other house. I'll go over there. And I said, oh, you're really not going to want to hear this. And he turns around really slowly. I can still see him. And he goes, you don't have an EpiPen, do you? And I was like, well, I didn't, it was, and he's like, if you don't die, I'm going to kill you. So I actually went, I didn't dare to get on the road back to Boston where I needed to teach. It was a Sunday. So I thought, as long as I'm sitting here to see how badly I'm going to swell, I might as well write to all the people on Facebook who are like, where have you been since July? And I wrote a letter saying, an essay saying, this is what America looks like to me. And one of the things I mentioned was that chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, had just on Friday the 13th written a letter to the acting director of national intelligence saying, we know you have a whistleblower account of something that has taken place and you have not handed it over to us, which by law you must do. So the only thing we can assume is that it involves a principal. So hand that sucker over, I paraphrase. And I decided I could go. It was the first time that I'd ever seen a specific accusation from the legislative branch that the executive branch had broken a specific law. So I wrote that, posted it on Facebook, and then I decided I could drive back to Massachusetts. It's about a 3.5 hour drive. And I got there, and my email was just exploding. And Facebook was just exploding with people wanting to know more. And so I thought, well, I don't want to flood the zone and write 2 nights in a row because who wants to hear from me that often? So I didn't write on the 16th, but I wrote again on the 17th, and I've written every night since. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think within a month, I had 1 million followers on Facebook. Just at the time looking at the exploding issue of the telephone call that President Donald Trump made to Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky in July of 2019 and the fallout from that. But somebody at the time said, well, I really, would love it if you would talk more generally about American politics. And I said, who could possibly do that? So the only thing that I set out to do was to answer the questions of people who wanted to know more about how our system worked. And I'm really well qualified to do that. I know the system very, very well. And I think that idea remains the same. But some things have happened that have changed the way that I think I fit into that scheme. That is, I did start doing American politics more generally. I rarely go into some of the other aspects of American life, although I'm not unqualified to talk about them. My doctorate's not in history, it's in the program in the history of American civilization. So I actually know art and religion and literature and all that really quite well. But the other thing that has happened is that it became clear to me that I needed to learn much more about foreign affairs. So not as in other people always want me to talk about other countries. I cannot do that. I am not trained to do that. But I am trained to talk about how the United States interacts with other countries. And the other thing that has changed, which I don't have time to do much anymore because I just didn't have enough space, but the other thing that has changed, I think, is that the people who write to me and my audience and I have grown together. So I think if you had said to anybody in September 2019 that there would literally be millions of people who read the equivalent of more than 350-page books every year about politics and history that are very, very deep dives into theory and into detail, they would have said, whatever you're smoking, you need to get off it because you're rotting your brain. And yet, in fact, there is a huge developed community that is deeply invested in this really quite difficult material. And I don't know quite what to make of that, but I do find it constantly challenging. And in fact, right now I'm finally off the road after 2 years and starting to get some sleep and reading philosophy, political philosophy much more deeply than I ever have before. And stuff that I never covered in graduate school. And it's going to be, and is already, but it's going to be even more deeply in my letters. And here's the news flash. I think people are going to be right there with me.
Yeah, I've said that the one thing we can thank Donald Trump for is the fact that we're all now a lot more aware of how our country works and how it doesn't work. So we're gonna jump in the deep end now and ask a question that's actually got a couple of different phases, parts of it, because we've put a few together. History is full of citizen.
This is like doing trivia night with my sons.
Well,
Like,
wait
it's a
till we get to
75-part question, and you got to get all the pieces right.
You're right. We're going to check on you. We haven't gotten to the lightning round yet,
That's
which
right.
is really tough with a historian, we know. But anyway, give me a few minutes and I'll read this whole thing. History is full of citizen-initiated movements that push back against tyranny of one type or another. What does history tell us about where we are as a country today and the scope and effectiveness of the pushback you are seeing against Trump? How can Indivisible and citizens in general be most effective in taking back our institutions? And what is the most effective way to reach out to others sitting on the sidelines to engage with us?
Okay, that's the heart of where we are, right? And if I forget any piece of that, please remind me. Um, One of the things that has been a problem for a long time for people who are trying to defend democracy is that so many Americans think that our system is safe, that it has been in place since at least the post-World War II years, but possibly as far back as the 1930s. And people really didn't think that it could be dismantled. They thought it was part of our Constitution or that nobody would rock the boat. As somebody said just today on social media, still, many people who go to the polls, especially those who currently vote Republican, really think that they're just choosing between vanilla ice cream and strawberry ice cream when they cast a vote. And we expected because of that, and I know we is doing a lot of work there, but I mean, generally, I think a majority of people expected that no matter who ended up in the White House and in the cabinet around the person in the White House, or even possibly in the Senate and the House of Representatives, that they'd tinker around the edges. They wouldn't dismantle the foundations of our legal system, for example. They wouldn't dismantle the foundations of the rules-based international order that have managed to keep world wars at bay since the 1940s. They wouldn't do more than tinker around the edges with the international global trade system that has kept the globe stable. And the ways in which it keeps the globe stable are fascinating. and deeply problematic in ways that I don't think we are grappling with sufficiently, with the destruction of those international trade routes, for example, which depend on freedom of the seas. Well, if we get rid of them, are we going to continue to protect freedom of the seas? And that, I think, is an open question. Anyway, that was a rabbit hole. So we thought that those things would stay intact. And and if they didn't stay intact, the people in positions of power would defend them. So one of the things that people always ask me what I'm surprised by, and the only thing I think that has surprised me in the last year, I'll give me a year, but perhaps, even the last 7 months, is I truly believed that the Senate Republicans would defend the prerogatives of the Senate. They didn't, they're not MAGAs. There's a lot of MAGAs in the House. There were not MAGAs in the Senate. We counted up at the beginning of the session, we figured there were about 13 to 15 full MAGA senators, which leaves you an awful lot of Republicans who were not MAGAs, who could have joined with the Democrats simply to do things like say, no, you can't claw back money that we have said you have to spend. That's established both in legal precedent from the Supreme Court and by the 1974 Impoundment Control Act. I mean, this is not negotiable. It's just the way it is. And instead, what they have done largely is to roll over and say, okay, we'll let you do it, but just this one time. Well, you know how that's going to go. So I think a lot of us expected that we would have guardrails, that if you will, the adults in the room would stop the craziness. And what we have discovered is that while the lower courts are holding, and they are really doing a fabulous job, and while the Democrats, especially in the House, have managed significantly to slow down the extreme destruction that the MAGA Republicans are trying to force through, that for the most part, the only guardrail that is holding is us. And that's crucially important because our Constitution is not based in the states. Our Constitution quite literally says that we, the people, are giving our power to our elected representatives to make laws in our behalf. And so long as they enjoy the support of the majority, they are a legitimate government. But if they lose the support of the majority, they are no longer a legitimate government, and they should be impeached, they should be fired, they should be replaced in an election. So, I think a lot of people still feel like they're waiting for the cavalry to come, but here's the news flash: we're the cavalry.
Yeah.
And the good news about that is that the vast majority of Americans do not like what the MAGA Republicans are doing. And if you look at the poll numbers on issues, you can't really trust polls on individuals, but you can trust them on issues. The number of Americans who like the idea of the mandatory childhood vaccines going into public schools, 81%. 82% for the people who live in Florida. So what we're saying is these are not fringe opinions. Same thing, common sense gun safety legislation. More than 80% of Americans want that. Tariffs, how many people think tariffs are doing them favors? Something down in the teens. The number of Americans who want the imposition of Project 2025 on us, 4%. I mean, you can see here that what the radical right is doing is they are trying to launch a coup over American society. And the only way to stop that is us. Now, what does that look like? What that means is that ordinary Americans need to put enough pressure on the institutions of society, and by that I mean all of them, the media, business, certainly legislatures, the Congress, and so on, making it very clear that the majority of the American people are not supporting the dramatic gerrymandering of Texas, for example, or now of Missouri, the attempts to pressure people in Indiana, and so on. They don't want people in the streets. They need to make that extraordinarily clear, because the way that translates into our politics is that it becomes more frightening for an elected official or somebody who wants to be an elected official. Crucial to remember, we're facing a generational change right now in our political system. They will answer to the majority, and you need to make sure they understand where the majority stands and that they hear from them. So I don't know if you've been following this today. The U.S. Tennis Association, I'm sure I've got the name wrong, USTA, tried to get media companies not to show people booing President Donald Trump. The outcry is such that the telephone system went down at the USTA. And I have not followed it through this afternoon. Like I say, I was on the water, but it's causing a real outcry. That matters because advertisers are going to notice that. The USTA is going to notice that. You know, the media companies, one media company, I believe, has already said, screw you, we're showing it anyway. That kind of speaking out matters. But crucially, we also need to get all those people who think they're voting vanilla or strawberry to get in the game too. And there's a number of ways to do that. We know that relational organizing is more powerful than anything else. That is, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. And that doesn't mean being hostile. That means changing the public conversation so that it's everywhere, it's in the water, and that you're a party, and I don't mean political party, you're a movement that they want to be part of. You know, we're where the momentum is, we're where the fun is. You know, when you go to a protest and people are dancing and there's music, that beats the hell out of going to a protest where everybody's screaming in your face. You know, making a celebration of American democracy and the things we care about is not simply saying what we oppose, but what we support. And the great news on that front is that we have on our side the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Fannie Lou Hamer, Dr. Hector Garcia, you know, who can I pick on from Georgia?
John Lewis.
What's that?
John Lewis.
There you go, John Lewis. I mean, you have all the greats on our side to say we stand with them. We can be heroes like they were. And the people who are trying to destroy our democracy have the Confederates, the Confederate leaders who screwed over everybody in Georgia. Don't even start me, black and white, and they have the Nazis. Well, you know, if you're quite literally, this is what I've been doing all day is reading Nazi philosophers because of the degree to which Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance rely on them for their next move. If you think about your neighbors and whether they would rather side with the Nazis or with Abraham Lincoln, yeah, some of them might go with the Nazis, but the vast majority of them actually believe in the principles of America. They just need to know what's at stake. And as I say, once they do, the number of people who sign on to something like Project 2025 is 4%. You know, they're the crazy guy in the attic. So that's the message that we have to get out there. And we must get it out there because the crisis of this fall is upon us. Trump and his minions are trying to take over our democracy right now. They're doing it in our faces, and once they have secured the levers of power, they are not giving them up in my lifetime. And I would very much like to stop having to write and to be able to go back and kayak full time.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is not something anymore we can say, oh, those people are overreacting. The rubber is meeting the road in September 2025, and the die is going to be cast by 2026.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the way of getting information out there. I know I've seen you speak about the media landscape and how different it is. What would you say? Who should people pay attention to besides you? You know, where is this going? You know, the New York Times is not the power that it used to be. How do we deal with all of that now?
Well, there's two separate things going on there. One is, you know, you asked what I did. I am really not an organizer, except what I do on my YouTube videos and all that. When you say people should read me, I think it's fine to read me to get a sense of what's happening and why it matters. But the truth is, it's very complicated. There's a lot of material in that, and most people aren't going to read that stuff. And it's less an issue, I think, of hammering people over the head with, did you see they did this? Did you see they did this? Did you read about this Supreme Court case that's in front of everybody? I think it's more a question of reminding people of what our values are. what it means to be an American, what that means to you. And the person that I always, always go to whenever I'm trying to figure out how to talk about something is Abraham Lincoln, because Abraham Lincoln was a freaking genius, but he didn't hit people over the head with it. He would just say, I believe that people should be treated equally before the law. That's not a hard concept. I believe people should have a say in their government, and that's guaranteed in the Declaration of Independence. That was John Lewis. Absolutely, an easy sentiment. So rather than sort of trying to go difficult in terms of influencing politics, I would say go simple. What matters to you? I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot in the stuff I do is simply declaring that we are America, not the people trying to destroy our democracy, but the person who shows up at kindergarten with, clean clothes for the neighbor kid who had an accident. That doesn't make the big time news, but what that says is we are people who care about each other. And whatever that looks like for you is a really powerful message to bring your A game to America. Now, how do you do that? There's a number of ways when in this new media landscape. One is you can distribute the little cards that people I know, but there are a lot of people are distributing cards, pieces of pottery that have messages on them that enable people who might not otherwise know what's going on to see something. I'm sorry, women's restrooms, great place to put information about people's rights, for example. And I'm kind of laughing because any woman on this call knows this, and a lot of men probably don't know we do those things. That's a great place to be, but also social media. So let me just run down social media. First of all, think about the ice bucket challenge of a couple of years back, a few years back. We can do the same thing. It's really easy to pick up your phone and do a short video and say, I saw one the other day that was incredibly powerful, an older man who said, I am a veteran. I've been a Republican my whole life. And he set his registration on fire. He said, never again. I'm never going to do this again because you people have ruined everything that I believed in the party. Now, how many people does he need to convince that to make that a good use of his time? You know how many? One. So that whole idea of getting out there and flooding the zone with media, with your social media accounts, and making sure that there is this changing sense of what is the weight of public opinion, which is why, the Trump flags were so powerful and the Trump hats, because you could look at somebody and say, oh, wow, I know that he disagrees with me. And that shuts up a whole lot of people. We need to do the opposite to make sure we're taking over the zone with information that makes people understand just what a minority those people are in. So there's the obvious, calling doing the 5 calls every day, but also putting pressure on people in state legislatures who are currently facing threats from Donald Trump if they don't gerrymander their states more than they already are. Indiana, you can watch this struggle playing out. The Indiana Republicans do not want to gerrymander their state again. They think it's going to really badly hurt them in 2026. Trump is trying to force them to do it, and you can see how they will be influenced by people saying, come on, we're Hoosiers. We don't do this. This is not, why do we care what this jerk from New York is telling us to do? We care about Indiana. And that will be, a powerful way to approach state legislatures. And just making sure that people have a community to catch them and to help them and to fight for democracy is what we have always done in these moments. It has always required solidarity. But right now, a lot of the people in Congress and in state legislatures are there because they have been supported by this radical extremist group. And we're going to have to replace them before we can expect those institutions to change.
Heather, I think that all of us hear you clearly about what you're saying about organization and the strength of numbers and good deeds and so on and so forth. But we had a pretty chilling experience the other day where we had a house party here under the 1 Million Rising where you were asked by individual to invite people over, basically build our numbers through community, through this relational canvassing to extent. And this young woman who's maybe mid-30s, pretty engaged, but pretty busy person, said, I went to No Kings and I had fun there, but I didn't think it would matter a bit. She said, I've never seen anything that we have done make a difference in the sense that Black Lives Matter. Where's that today? That kind of fizzled out. What about the climate change issues? Where are we today with climate change? And Barb and I sat there kind of struggling, hey, there's Vietnam, we made a difference. The civil rights movement, we made a difference, but that's ancient history to her, not even on her plate. So what's the right answer to someone like that?
So this, I think, is where the media, including, although I don't consider myself a journalist, including people like me, have fallen down. In fact, those protests have mattered a lot. So you look at the degree to which the Democrats have been able, for example, to keep the Epstein issue in front of the media, and the fact that House Speaker Mike Johnson had to actually send Congresspeople home early to
Right.
shut those people up, and then they came back and they're right back at it again. They have been able to force the Department of Justice to start disgorging that information from the Epstein files, although right now it's redacting everything. But if you want, I can talk more about the Epstein files. But they have also managed to
We
blunt
do
the
want you to at
worst
some point.
the worst pieces of the budget reconciliation bill. They have the people speaking up have managed actually to shut Republicans down from even holding town halls because they recognize the pressure that they're under. If you I can keep on going down a list here. Climate change, again, one of the huge problems with this and why people needed to speak out. And, I know we don't have all day here, but, the Biden administration actually made huge strides to combat climate change. It was our largest investment in addressing the dangers of climate change in our history, enough that you probably don't remember this or thought that this was the connection, but it really pissed off a lot of Europe because he invested so heavily in the US. It was actually hurting some of the initiatives in Europe to try and get their products into the United States. And nobody stood up for him. Nobody stood up to say this is a great thing. What we tended to hear on the part of the American far left, which is not the same as centrists liberals, was that it wasn't enough. And so instead of there being anybody saying, hey, this is great, look at the fact that the Biden administration brought, 500,000 manufacturing jobs back to the United States, primarily to work on issues of climate change, never got any real attention. And instead, now what we're seeing is the destruction of all that and the resurgence of a reliance on fossil fuels. And now people are saying, hey, crap, what happened? And the trick is that we have got to trumpet those successes. And here's the kicker, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of people, like a lot of people think that I do something special. And the truth is that all I do is I dare to speak up for American democracy when things are going in a good direction. Because the truth is, it's never perfect. I'd like an awful lot more than what we're seeing on, I can't tell you how many fronts. And the minute that you stand up and you say, hey, this politician did something I like, people both on the right and the left start screaming, well, this is way overreach, or this is not enough. And they yell at you rather than yelling at the opponents. And this is a dynamic that makes me crazy. If you don't like, or if you didn't like the Inflation Reduction Act because you didn't think it went far enough, why yell at the Democrats? Yell at the Republicans.
Yeah.
And yet what we got was real attacks in that case on the administration that was trying to do the right thing. And that's another dynamic that I would really urge people to pay attention to. The understanding is that people yell at, I just think of it kind of like parents, like the toddler throws a fit against their parents because they know their parents are going to listen, but they behaved with a stranger. And I always feel that there's that dynamic in politics that when you don't like what is going on, you yell at the person trying to fix it rather than the person who is causing it, because the person trying to fix it is probably going to listen. And that's something we need to get over and to start to yell at the other side that is destroying it rather than the side that is helping. So, I think that criticism is not unfounded, that we are not paying enough attention to what's going well. But you're seeing at least some of that now with Trump's assertions that Democratic run cities are hellholes of crime, when people are actually saying and posting on social media, in fact, the top cities for crime in the United States are all run by Republican governors. So she's got, I get what she's saying, but it's exactly why we're in this mess we're in.
We just, you okay there?
Yeah, I'm looking for a glass so I can grab, here we go. So I can grab some water.
Okay. In Georgia, we just had a huge sweep of a Hyundai factory, and I think around 500 people were
Detained.
Many of whom were actually
South Korea.
visiting business people who were here to help set up a factory. It's sort of an interesting situation because our Republican governor, Kemp, had made a big deal about bringing this factory to Georgia, and it will employ thousands of people. So in a sense, we're wondering what the thinking was behind ICE in carrying out this detention. But can you talk a little bit about what's going on with ICE? I mean, we've got this huge amount of money that's going to go to the militarization, I guess you would say, of ICE. And, what does that mean? What should we be doing about it? Is it as bad as I think it is? Are we building up for a secret police here? What's your thought?
So to go back to the factory, it was a Hyundai battery factory.
Yes.
And there's a lot of discussion in a number of circles about what really was going on in that raid, because there were a number of things that were very odd about it. And I have nothing at all definitive. And the reason that I even am mentioning it is because I do think it's important to throw into the mix here that the President of the United States is not okay.
Yeah.
He is not mentally okay. And it seems pretty clear that the people who are calling the shots are Russell Vogt at the Office of Management and Budget, who is a big supporter of Project 2025. He's the one who wants to basically get rid of the government and have a dictator. I'm cutting to the chase here. Stephen Miller, who is the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, who seems to be the person who's essentially running the domestic sweeps and the Department of Justice attacks on equal rights. And he's a white nationalist.
Right.
Vogt is a Christian nationalist. Miller is a white nationalist. And then there is also Elbridge Colby in the Pentagon, who seems to be calling the shots in foreign affairs, because Hegseth is doing push-ups somewhere. And there is, because of that, a number of places in which it's very difficult to untangle who is making the decisions and why they are making those decisions. And this Hyundai case involves all of those things. So it's not immediately clear, I think, who called the shots on that one, who signed the paperwork. And one of the things about this administration is it's incredibly opaque. It's very, very difficult to figure out who's doing what. And I feel constantly like I'm trying to find the shape around the elephant. And this is one of those things. Now, you're identifying the larger question, though, of what's happening with ICE. Okay, so the attempt to create a dictatorship in this country, which is where we are, I want to be very clear about that. I don't think that has been the goal since the 1980s, but many of the moves that the Republicans have made since the 1980s, after they got taken over by the movement conservatives, have led them to a point where the only logical outcome now is a dictatorship. One of the reasons I wrote my Republican book and published it in 2014 was because I was really, really hoping that they would see what they were doing and the light would dawn. And instead, the radical right just pilloried me for that book, thinking I was too hard on the Republicans. And as I said to someone the other day, I await my lavish apology. But there's a problem with getting the military to get behind a coup in the United States because our military is ancient. It is very well established. It has its own rules and traditions, and people are very firm on the idea that they swear their loyalty to the Constitution, not to a person. In addition to that, we have the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act, a really interesting law that says that the military cannot be used against the U.S. people against Americans for domestic law enforcement, except in very limited situations. So what are you going to do if you're trying to get the military behind you, as Trump tried in Trump was 1.0 when he tried in June of 2020 to get the military to back him, if you remember that, his big march across Lafayette Square and all that. And the military, led by Mark Milley, came out and said, You know, I always felt that military officials didn't get enough credit for that because a lot of them spoke up really powerfully to say our allegiance is to the Constitution. So if you're trying to get the military behind you and to demonstrate power, because so much of what Trump is doing is demonstrating his power. Every time he gets tripped up, he makes another demonstration. And that, by the way, is Susie Wiles as White House Chief of Staff. She's running a TV program, is what she's doing. Every day is a new reality TV show program. So she is having him project this image of strength. So what do? You have to turn to the one department that has law enforcement that is not covered by the Posse Comitatus Act. And that's the Department of Homeland Security, which is a new department, war on terror, right? George W. Bush. Right. It does not consider itself covered by Posse Comitatus. And in fact, certain of its members have explicit authority to use their might against American citizens. And those are our coasties. The U.S. Coast Guard is charged with enforcing domestic law enforcement, and they are within the Department of Homeland Security. But a lot of people don't recognize that most of the pieces of the different bureaus and agencies in Homeland Security have their own police, ATF. Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and some other stuff I've forgotten. ATF. Now, of course, I can't think of a single other agency in there, but there are a lot of drug enforcement. A lot of those people actually have law enforcement. And the other place that you see Trump trying to create his own police is in the Department of Justice with the FBI. They're essentially taking these incredibly skilled kind of white collar sleuths and turning them into a street police force. And the FBI is really pissed off about it. You can read any article in which there's an informant to the press, and they're like, this is not what we're trained for. So ICE is part of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So is Customs and Border Patrol. And by expanding ICE, what they are doing is creating this force that is not bound by Posse Comitatus and that will act under the orders of the head of the Department of Homeland Security, who is Kristi Noem, who's working hand in glove with Stephen Miller, and who is pretty clearly a white nationalist. So what's going to happen there? When I say we need to be very concerned about the rise of a dictatorship, there is this great huge influx of money into ICE. There's also the establishment of detention centers and large detention centers. And this is hugely alarming to historians because once you've got detention centers, I mean, theoretically, these detention centers should be wayfare places for undocumented immigrants who are being repatriated to their countries of origin. Whether or not you agree with that, that is theoretically what they are for. Why do we need
Huge.
millions of beds.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's exactly how countries get into the problem of domestic suppression of political opponents or any group considered undesirable. Because remember that these detention centers overwhelmingly, if not entirely, are being run by private contractors.
Yeah.
And those
Yeah.
private contractors have an incentive to keep those beds full. And if you are wondering if we can imagine that in the United States, that is precisely how for-profit prisons happen. It's profitable, financially profitable to keep those prisons full. And if they are not full, they're losing money. So that's what ICE is up to, and it's extremely concerning. Now, here's the other side of it. If you look at the way that the Trump administration is trying to put people into positions in ICE, they are clearly advertising it in two ways. They're advertising it as a leg up for those white men that have been left behind in the economy because they have not gotten the right skills they need in the 21st century, or whatever reasons they think they have been left behind. You no longer need to have a college degree to be part of ICE. There is a signing bonus, I think, of $50,000. There is loan forgiveness for loans up to $60,000. I mean, there's all kinds of sweet incentives, and they've gotten rid of the age limits largely, so it's from 18 to in your 50s, as I recall. I don't remember. I'm not going to sign up, but if you think about that, why do they need to do that? If ICE is so damn popular,
Right.
why do you have to give those kinds of incentives? And that's, again, where popular pressure comes in.
Yeah.
If all your neighbors are like, hey, that's great, you got a job with ICE, then somebody else is going to say, oh, maybe I should get a job with ICE too. But if everybody says, what the hell are you doing out there taking grandma from a car? You suck. It's going to be harder and harder to fill those positions. So
Right.
that's another place where speaking up is really going to matter. And again, now is the time.
That's, Heather, that's really, really a good point. I think that across Georgia, in fact, and maybe across the country, Indivisible has recognized the whole immigrant issue and the ICE issue is something we can really push back hard on because we think that Trump's really vulnerable on what it's doing to people. But I think we can't leave this discussion, although I'm looking at the time and God, I thought we'd been on talking for 10 minutes. In fact, we've been talking for almost an hour. We can't leave this without touching on the Epstein files, which you wrote about a lot today. How do you see that evolving, and how vulnerable is Trump over this whole thing? Should we be using that as an issue to be pushing back, or what is your feeling about that?
Okay, so the reason time has slipped away is because I was very deliberately crowding as much as I could into answers. So it's my fault. But I
No,
hope
it's not. No, it's not.
some stuff
You
there.
are great to even be here.
Epstein files. The Epstein files, of course, I should preface this by saying I'm a prophet of the past, not the future.
Right.
So for all I know, I'm totally wrong.
Right.
You and I can equally guess the future. But the Epstein files are huge for a number of reasons. But let's start with the most practical ones for you. And that is, everyone keeps talking about how none of the scandals that have hit Donald Trump have touched him. And, people like me, our hair's on fire. I mean, he should have been convicted in the first impeachment, not just the second, but in the first, and so on and so forth. The Epstein files are the first scandal that the Republicans are splitting over, that the Republicans are hitting. And this is enormously important because Trump won in 2024 because of support from QAnon folks. We keep forgetting that QAnon still exists, but it does. And QAnon is based around the premise that there is an elaborate sexual trafficking ring of young girls, mostly, that is frequented by famous people, and that they're all protecting each other, and that the only person who can bring them down is Donald Trump. Okay, so what we are beginning to see is that, in fact, as so much of the Republican rhetoric has been, this appears to have been a way to cover up the fact that the person most spoken of in conjunction with Jeffrey Epstein is Donald Trump. And that really got pushed down and hidden during the Biden administration. And you hear a lot of this stuff because the Department of Justice would not comment on an ongoing investigation.
Yeah.
So they weren't going to bring this stuff out. And plus, Biden had all sorts of ideas about politically playing fair. That's a different issue. And a worthwhile one to talk about, obviously not today. But now that when Pam Bondi, and of course Trump really pushed, I'm going to let go of these files. I'm going to make sure you see him. I'm going to, you're now going to know. And of course he said all these Democrats were going to be involved. Well, if you remember the chronology here, when he and Musk had a falling out, Musk on June 5th posted on social media, here's the bombshell, Trump's in the Epstein files. And then he walked it back. But we now know, thanks to reporting in the Wall Street Journal, that the Department of Justice had told Trump in late May that he was in the Epstein files. Now, the chances were very good. He knew he was in the Epstein files simply because he had such a long experience and friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And the way they fell out becomes increasingly likely to have been that Epstein wanted to buy this piece of property. Trump scooped him on it. Epstein believed that because Trump was broke, that it was a money laundering scheme for the Russians, and he threatened to sue Trump over it, which would have brought out the money laundering scheme. And Trump, in turn, dropped the dime on Epstein to the FBI. At least that's the way things currently appear. And if anybody's interested in that, I linked a lot of those stories and the evidence to it. Again, right now it's just the shape around the elephant, but in the last letter I wrote on Facebook and Substack. But if, in fact, Musk backed away from that. But if you remember in early July, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, came out and said, there are no Epstein files, or she put it, there is no Epstein list.
Yeah, right.
Which nobody ever said that there was I mean, maybe people said it, but that was never the idea that he had written down 2 girls to Donald Trump, but rather that he had quite extensive videos and photographs on the different people of wealth who were frequenting not just his island, but his Manhattan penthouse, or I don't know, it's a penthouse. I guess it was 11 floors, so maybe one of those was a penthouse. His Manhattan apartment, or whatever it was, his Manhattan building. And when Pam Bondi said that, and then the Department of Justice had some really weaselly worded, oh, there are no Epstein files, MAGA went bonkers. MAGA went absolutely bonkers and said, what are you talking about? Like, oh, this is why we're here. What are you talking about? And he has been madly trying to put that down. And the more he tries to put it down, the louder MAGA is getting. By the way, there's another thing that MAGA is also furious about, which is his recent statement that he was going to invite 600,000 Chinese immigrant students to come into the United States. It's not gotten on the press in the mainstream media, but they're furious about that too. The reason that matters is that if the MAGA coalition splits, as it certainly seems to be doing, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey, representatives from Georgia and Kentucky, respectively, have taken a stand against Trump on this. Your Marjorie Taylor Greene is standing against Trump on this. That's a huge problem because, first of all, it hurts Trump's support, but it also means that the MAGA movement going into Trump's successor, which I think we have to be talking about, who knows how they're going to jump. So that's a problem. But then there is also the other problem here, and that is something is in those files. Like if you think about Donald Trump and the fact he said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and he wouldn't lose supporters. He did lose supporters over one thing. His own supporters booed him. And that was when he talked about how good the COVID vaccine had been. And he backed off. He stopped talking about it. He took their side. Yeah, you're right. It all sucks, right? He didn't have to do that. He could have said, screw you, you're alive because of me. But he didn't. He backed off from them. He thinks there's something in those files that is going to turn his supporters against him. Now, I don't know what it is. I think we can all make some guesses about what it is. But whatever is in those files is so toxic that he thinks he's not only going to lose Democrats and independents, but he's going to lose his own supporters. And that suggests, actually one of the things I researched yesterday was the death of Madge Oberholzer. Do you know who that is? She's the woman murdered by the head of the KKK in the 1920s. The KKK was rising in the 1920s. D.C. Stevenson looked like he was going to be a huge player in national politics, and he raped and murdered this young woman and brutalized her. And that was, he is convicted in 28, and the Republicans really don't ever recover from that. And the reason I was thinking about it, obviously, is because we don't know what is in those files. But think of all the people who have signed on to MAGA thinking it represents law and order and morality and all of that stuff. And even now they're saying, well, Trump is the one going to bring that down. And what happens if we see files that suggest that far from bringing it down, he was at the center of it? That's why Epstein is important. And then that's politically. And then, of course, there is just the fact that we as human beings should stand for the law and for Epstein's survivors.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, an hour has gone by, Heather. This has been great, and I wish we could continue talking. We have many more questions.
Yeah, in fact, we have a lot of.
Can I
But
leave you though? Can I leave you with some hope here though?
No, please do,
absolutely,
please do
yes.
that.
So, we are a movement. And if anybody had said to us 10 years ago that there was going to be this huge pro-democracy movement, would you have believed them? You'd have been like, we're a democracy, whatever. Georgia always jumps out to me as one of the states that people talk about as being a Republican state. But it isn't a Republican state. It's a voter suppression state. And you can
Yes.
tell that by the fact that the Republicans keep trying to take away people's votes. You're on the front lines to try and restore democracy in the state of Georgia. And you're there with places like North Carolina and Pennsylvania and even Florida and Texas. But there's no reason to think in this moment that those of us who care about democracy are going to lose this battle. That is, in the past, we have always managed to win it. And in the past, we have often been up against people who were young and healthy and well organized. And that is not the case this time around.
Right.
We also know from public polling, which was not available in the 1930s or the 1890s or the 1850s, that the vast majority of Americans are on our side. We also know from watching Germany in the 1930s, or Hungary more recently, or Russia in the 1990s, or the United States in the 1870s and the 1880s, exactly how somebody destroys a democracy and creates a one-party dictatorial state. We have all kinds of tools that the people before us didn't have. And we also currently have the ability for a wide coalition of people who might not agree with each other about financial issues or about immigration or about education or about who's the best rock band, but they can agree that we do not want our government to be taken over by a dictator who is going to destroy us all. And I just find it, I wish we weren't doing this. I wish the world were secure. But if we have to be doing it, I feel like it is an extraordinary privilege to be able to record our names, alongside someone like John Lewis or Abraham Lincoln or Fannie Lou Hamer. So when you're trying to think about what you have to do next to convince your neighbors to complain or to throw some money in a pot for some state legislature who's going to stop the craziness, or get out and stop the gerrymandering, or stop voter suppression. When you're thinking about that, think about the fact that we here get to be the people that preserve American democracy, not just for us and our children and for our country, but for the rest of the world. And what that will say to the rest of the world if we manage to do it.
Great.
Wow, thank you, Heather.
Thank you very much.
You know, I know everyone on this call wants everything to change tomorrow, but listening to your wisdom and how you give me strength, and I think you give us all strength that, you know, step by step by step, we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out together.
We got no choice. So we'll do
Right.
it.
That's
We will
right.
do it.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely to
Enjoy
see
the
you
rest of
guys.
your Sunday evening. We will we'll be working on your your letter for tomorrow.
Yes.
Well, please do that, because I'm going to be reading Nazi philosophers. I'm
Oh,
actually
that does
expecting
not
to
sound
take-
fun.
I'm actually expecting to take the night off because Liza Donnelly and I did another where I talk and she draws, which I can't watch because I can either read or I can watch, but I can't do both. But people
Yes.
really seem to like them. So
Great.
we've done one
Great,
for
great.
tomorrow, which is the anniversary of Ford's pardon of Nixon.
Great.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. We know you're incredibly busy and we feel very privileged that you'd come and spend some time with us.
Yes.
Well, lovely to see you, and let's get out there and do it.
Yes,
Yes.
do it. Thanks, Heather.
Take care.
You too.